in Paris, I was already feeling vulnerable and anxious. So I thought it was better to skip the press conferences and exercise self-care. We now have our hymn, this morning's special music, For All That Is Our Life, sung by UUFCC's Quarren Choir with accompaniment by James Boyle. All right, it is now time for the Book of Life, followed by silent meditation and the singing of Spirit of Life. We have a long tradition at UUFCC of sharing our joys and sorrows and life milestones by entering them into the Book of Life. While we continue to meet virtually, we ask you to email your joys, sorrows, and personal milestones to this address, bookoflife@uufcc.org. You can also find instructions for that in the weekly updates. And please send those messages no later than the Saturday prior to the service. This done, the worship associate will read your words to the congregation the following Sunday. And after that service, they will be entered into the actual read book. Now let me share the joys and sorrows and milestones I've received this week. And after that, we will enter into our moment of silent meditation, followed by singing Spirit of Life. I received one email this week, It is a sorrow from Jeanette Martimo. She writes, last week, shortly after arriving in Minnesota, a yearly trek we take to visit relatives, my younger sister Lorraine had an incident that resulted in her being hospitalized, intubated, unresponsive, and in the eyes of the medical staff, little hope of living. Any positive thoughts, hopes, or prayers would be appreciated. That's from Jeanette Martimo. And now we'll enter into a moment of silence. Let us now have Spirit of Life, please. We will have Ted momentarily.
Good morning, everyone in Zoom land and YouTube land. A familiar saying goes, there is nothing bad or good, but thinking makes it so. It's a prison to me. That's from Shakespeare's Hamlet. For the past year or two or three, we have been living in stressful times. We can see it in the behavior of people all around. It manifests itself in many ways, but stress may be external or internal. We can create it for ourselves, by ourselves. If you are hoping that I will explain all this and provide you with the solutions you need in the next few minutes, you are dreaming. However, for several years, I worked as a psychological counselor with juvenile boys in detention and adult sex offenders on probation here in Florida. I have a few tales to tell, vignettes, simple little stories, which may be of some interest to you. One of my clients was deathly afraid of flying in an airplane. When he had to go to an airport to pick up someone, he was so tense he could hardly get there and then just barely wait to get away as soon as possible. Just thinking about going there made him nervous. Now, his wife wanted him to fly to Arizona with her, he said. I told him that was easy to fix. First, before he ever would go to the airport, he had to imagine himself going there. Get in the car, pull into the street, drive down the road, head for the airport, pull into the entrance, park the car, go inside the terminal, pass through security, go up the ramp, into the plane, and get in his seat, and then wait for the plane to take off. But whenever he would begin to tense up, then stop, relax, think about something else until calm. If he would immediately tense up again, then try again some other time. Step by step, at a time, until bit by bit, until he could actually do it. A few weeks later, I got lost, okay. Little by little, slowly work his way in his imagination to the seat in the plane. Then, when he could do it without getting too upset, came the time to start doing it for real. One step at a time until starting to tense up, then stop, relax, and try again. Bit by bit until he could actually do it. A few weeks later, he came and told me that he had flown to Arizona with his wife and then back home. He still did not like flying, he said, but he could do it. Then his wife said she wanted to fly to Spain. No way, he said, would he fly for hours over the whole Atlantic Ocean. I suggested they could take a cruise ship. Our imagination is a wonderful thing. It can transform our world in so many ways, but can also make us a little crazy. For example, almost everyone has had a nightmare or two when growing up. A common one is falling. You are high up, tumbling downwards to the earth, getting more panicky by the second, and then just before smashing into the ground, you wake up. You're in bed. Your whole body reacted to the terrifying fall. Your heart is beating hard. You are breathing, gasping for air. Your muscles are tight. You are sweating. But curiously, you did not fall out of bed. Hardly anyone ever does. Once you learn to sleep in a bed without rails, your brain knows where you are and keeps you safe. The question then arises, why didn't the part of you that knew where you are not communicate to the rest of your body that you were not really falling, but safe in bed. Your imagination can run away with you and take your emotions along for the ride. It can even do that when you are awake. Then that can be a real problem. A wild imagination and rampaging emotions can pull us to the edge of reality or even beyond sometimes. But as our flying friend learned, you can use your imagination to help you control your emotions. Your rational mind can begin to take control and guide you into better ways of thinking and behaving. However, it may not always be as easy as my little story suggests. Many of the boys at the juvenile detention program where I worked came from broken homes. Their parent could not control them. Each week, every boy was allowed to make one telephone call home. Some boys could not talk with their parent for even a minute before beginning to argue, to get upset, or even start crying. This could go on every week, even month after month. I had to try to hold a counseling session with each boy at least once a week, sometimes every day. One boy was getting close to his release date. He had to make plans for going home, but he could not speak with his mother on the phone without bursting out emotionally. It turned out that his mother was breaking down emotionally too. I spoke with her by phone and asked her to come to the detention camp. I suggested that she could make a list of behaviors she could not accept and also some compromises she would be willing to make. I did the same with the boy. They would meet face to face in my office. First the mother and then the boy would present their list without any interruptions from the other. Each had to sit and listen. Later, they could comment. Then the discussions and negotiations began. I proposed that they had to sign a contract listing the behaviors they would accept and agree to and those they could not. When they were ready, the contracts were written out and signed by each. Each had a copy. When the boy got home, they would live by the contract and renegotiate any changes later. They both promised to abide by their written agreement. I then pointed out that they had just had a civil and meaningful conversation. It was their first in many months. Focusing your mind on a task can help you get control over your emotions, at least temporarily. A successful solution to a problem can help make for a more satisfactory situation. My wife, Shirley, worked for 10 years in a prison in Pennsylvania in a unit with some 60 inmates, all convicted of various sex crimes. When one mentions sex offenders, most people think of the worst possible kind and assume that they're all like that. Many are not. For example, one of our clients was a young woman who, when a 17-year-old high school student, developed an intimate relationship with a boy 3 years younger. When she celebrated her 18th birthday, his parents called the police. She was now an adult and the boy was 4 years younger. She was convicted, sent to prison, and will be registered as a sex offender for the rest of her life. Shirley created a program that caught the attention of the prison authorities. The recidivism rate among her clients after their release from prison had come down noticeably. In addition to the regular routine of individual and group counseling, she made changes that proved to be significant. Among other things, she stopped having inmates brought individually to her remote office for counseling. She found a room in the sex offender unit that she used for individual counseling. In that room, she built a library of books and films relevant to sex offenses. Inmates could visit her in that room individually by twos or threes just to talk. They could borrow those books and those films to look at individually. She remained in the unit all day, every day, which the rest of the treatment staff did not tend to do. Among her rules was that all the inmates had to be properly groomed and dressed all day, every day. While remaining aware that some of her clients had violent histories and had committed abhorrent crimes, looking at them all as irremediable monsters blocked seeing the humanness of many. That made counseling ineffective.
Okay.
They were not just their crimes personified, they were people with human needs and qualities, no matter how wanting. Many responded to being treated humanely and offered hope of change. In Pennsylvania, when the prison system tried to introduce Shirley's techniques into practice in every sex offender facility, they failed. They needed a Shirley everywhere. The techniques alone did not work. Her personal humaneness made the difference. When seeking counseling, finding the counselor best for you may take some time and effort. The right one can really help you find your way to solving your problems. But the thing is, you have to solve your problems, the ones you may have helped to create. No one can do that for you. In Florida, Shirley got me to join her at the Charlotte Behavioral Health Care and working with former sex offender convicts now living in the community on probation. I had appropriate credentials. We worked as a team there and also with juvenile boys at the Crossroads detention camp. At Crossroads, she discovered that some boys had artistic talent. After a while, our office walls were covered with artworks created by the boys. She provided the art materials. A few eventually decided to go to art school. When the boys first came in our office, or when their parents arrived for the first time and came into our office, they realized this was not the typical detention program. It was like a completely different place. And it was intended to be a completely different place. It was not part of the detention camp. It was part of Charlotte Behavioral Health Care. Shirley found that some boys who had been in as many as 15 foster homes before coming to Crossroads had never had a real birthday party. In time, every boy celebrated a birthday party in our office together with his detention friends. Most of the boys liked to sing, play instruments, and even dance. Counseling sessions often were conducted over a game of chess or cards. Talking was easier when enjoying a game. Feeling comfortable with your counselor can make a big difference. The boys came from a variety of backgrounds. A few were very hostile. Occasionally, one would say that he was determined to make me fail. I told him that I could not fail. For one, I went home every night, and he couldn't. He would have to live with the consequences of his behavior, not I. Usually, but not always, the resistance would fade away over the minimum of 9 months the boys were in detention. Depending on their behavior, they could remain at the camp for a year or more. While in the program, most of the boys improved in their behavior and attitudes. Many grew physically. The problem was when they were released to go home. There, they were back among their broken family, defiant friends, scheming drug dealers, and other negative conditions. With even a few weeks, quite a few were rearrested and sent back into detention, or if now age 18, into prison. Some boys were determined not to fall back. One boy convinced his mother to move into another neighborhood so he would be able to go to a different school and make new friends. She even managed to find a part-time job for him to keep him busy and make a little money after his release. Another boy was close to finishing his high school diploma. Many boys at the camp completed a GED while at Crossroads. He had a few months to go in his sentence after earning his diploma. I suggested that a college in the area might be willing to let him earn some college credits while still in detention, and that I had the credentials and experience to teach a course or two. The arrangements were made, and he took 2 courses, one with me and another with the education staff teacher, and earned 6 credits. Later, after release, he continued in college and eventually earned a degree. In addition, his experience working in the detention kitchen, which all the boys had to do sooner or later, qualified him for a job in a hotel restaurant while going to college. Some of the boys decided to go to culinary school. For years afterwards, his mother would come to Crossroads to try to help other boys. Originally, she had called the police to get her son arrested and placed in detention away from his negative friends. One boy with teardrops tattooed on his face was an immigrant from Asia. When allowed to call home, he explained that his family spoke no English. No one on the staff spoke his language. So he called his uncle and told him how to come to Crossroads, hide his car behind bushes farther down the dirt farm road. On the arranged day, he bolted from the camp where there were no fences, ran to the car, and off they drove. The state police were called. One officer had an idea. He called the boy's home and asked for him by name. The woman who answered said he was not home, but he would be soon because his uncle went to pick him up. The police got there before he did and were waiting for him to show up. A recurring problem was that the younger, smaller, weaker, and more frightened boys would be harassed and intimidated by the older, bigger, meaner ones. Sometimes a boy would be intimidated into giving away all his meager possessions to buy some relief. Security staff people would encourage such boys to fight with their harassers at night. They were expected to lose, but the point was to show grit and not give in. After a while, the older boys would move on to someone else who was a newer inmate. One little fella from an immigrant farm family was barely old enough to be sent to detention. His father used to come home often in a drunken rage and abuse his wife, the children's mother. The children gathered around their mother when their father threatened to stab her and tried to protect her. When the boy arrived at Crossroads, he said that he would kill his father when he goes home. Over the months, I tried to help him see that he would become just like his father, a dangerous brute. Instead, he had to plan a better life. The boy could not read or write and did not know his numbers. A year later, at his release ceremony, he expressed his gratitude to the Crossroads public school staff for teaching him how to read and to do arithmetic. He told me that he wanted to get an education, a good job, and build a nice home for his mother. One of our practices when group counseling with the boys was to have them write something about the day's discussion or anything else that they had on their minds. Many boys did not want to reveal anything personal about themselves in group, partly because they all lived together, where there was no privacy. Even in personal counseling, many were reticent, at least at first. A written note could make an opening. One boy wrote that he was planning to kill himself after release from detention. When a boy would not talk with me, sometimes I suggested that he could write a letter about what was concerning him. If that was too much, draw cartoons with, for example, stick figures for his parents, siblings, friends, or whatever, telling a story. Possibly concentric circles with segments of family, friends, school, etc. Whatever could get talk going. Everything from the past would be kept confidential, but current criminal activities had to be reported, they were all told. The same rules applied to the adult sex offenders. Among the adults, sharing in group seemed to be easier. They learned to help one another over the year or more they were together. Often the first time they had ever spoken about their private lives, feelings, and thoughts was in group therapy. Everyone there had a similar difficult story to tell. The challenge for us counselors was to listen without being judgmental, to be empathetic, and to offer hope for positive change. Speaking quietly, calmly, paying attention, trying to be authentic, tended to eventually evoke similar behavior from the client, but not appear manipulative. Manipulation is the predator's game. They are good at it. Some of our clients would not make it, but others did. Those who made it had to acknowledge that their problem was real and serious and would not go away, but they could do something about it. They learned their warning signs, to quickly get away from a situation before it went too far, to get help and to know where to get help and to actually get it when they needed it. If they could control themselves, they could return to society. Otherwise, they faced life in prison. When counseling worked, it brought a positive feeling to me and to the client. When it did not, I knew that the client's pain would continue and someone might be hurt again and again. Trying to help might prove futile, but it was not hopeless. For years, some of Shirley's Pennsylvania clients would write to her occasionally to tell her how they were doing. They were managing their lives. Recovery is a form of stress, a time of changing thoughts, feelings, and emotions that have to be adjusted even as things are getting better. We have had a hard time of it lately. Quite a few of us have not done well. Many have been upset. Some became angry. Relationships have been damaged, even broken. Will we all be able to reconcile, recover, and restore some of what we had? We need to try to learn how to do better. It may be more challenging than we expect, but it is not hopeless. Thank you.
Ted, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk, wonderful lessons in it, told via stories, which everyone loves. Very moving. We thank you. Thank you very much. Very timely. Our closing words will be familiar to you from our hymn book. They're from Julian of Norwich, a 14th century anchoress or female anchorite, who lived in seclusion in a cell. She lived through the Black Death, and she wrote the first and best known surviving book in English by a known woman author. Ted requested her words today for their soothing assurance. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Julian of Norwich. We move on to the offering, which is a sacrament of the Free Church, supported by the generosity of all who join with us. We need and value this service. Zoom and YouTube don't provide ways for us to pass the baskets for now, but we still need your financial support. And these are the ways you can give. I have 4 on my list. You can mail checks to the office the old-fashioned way. You can drop them in our mailbox outside the church. You can call the office to make other arrangements. And you can donate through the Venmo app. If you do that, make out your check to UUFCC offering. And be sure if you want that donation to apply to anything other than the operating fund. For example, our second helping. Make sure to indicate that in the checks memo line. Speaking of the second helping, remember that it supports the Harry Chapin Food Bank, 2 local food pantries, CHAPS, and Meals on Wheels. So your generosity is always appreciated. I'm back with you, Ted, on the generations of young people you worked with. Now for Life of the Community. This is a time when we highlight UUFCC's special events and activities. I hope you have religiously read your weekly copy of the updates, because that includes a calendar and links for connecting via Zoom. And that's also a very important way for all of us to stay in community, to stay connected. If you'd like to have any fellowship events highlighted during the service, you email the worship associates at the address I gave you earlier, bookoflife@uufcc.org. And after that big buildup, I would like to announce that I have no announcements. Before we extinguish the chalice today, I'd like to remind you that when the service is over, you are invited to unmute and join us in fellowship. First, we'll sing the benediction, then stay tuned for Mary Jane Williams to explain the process to you of how to join with us. And now please join me in extinguishing the flame of your chalices with these traditional words. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of hope, the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May these ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace. You may extinguish your flame.